What's going on, everyone? Mike Singer of blueandgold.com, recruiting insider here at BGI, joined by our football analyst and, of course, former Irish linebacker captain Mike Goolsby. On this episode of Pod Like a Champion, usually we have Patrick Engel on the recruiting show here at Blue and Gold, but bringing Goolsby back on. I think our last podcast we had Goolsby on as well for our recruiting show. So there's just a lot going on with recruiting and new commit and everything. So we wanted to get Mike's thoughts on these prospects. This podcast is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. With interest rates below 3%, there has never been a better time to lock in a low fixed interest rate for your mortgage. You'll never need to think about refinancing again. Set it and forget it. And with JFQ Lending, you are guaranteed to get the highest level of customer service. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and over 3,000 five-star reviews. Give Jared Ritter a call today at 480-637-7979 or email him directly at jritter@jfqlending.com. JFQ Lending, equal access lender, licensed in over 40 states. www.jfqlending.com. Let's get right to Notre Dame's newest commit in the 2021 class. Mike, it really came out of nowhere. It was a pretty interesting thing. Notre Dame recruiting coordinator Brian Polian got in touch with Schweitzer in late July. And this, even though Schweitzer committed to Nebraska in June, Notre Dame kind of stayed in touch with him. And then late July, Polian says, hey, we got a spot for you. We want you in this class. So Schweitzer went to Indiana. I believe he told me he was hanging out with some buddies, and part of the trip to go out there was, I believe they had like a lake house or something, then also went up to Notre Dame. So obviously we're in a dead period, so you can't, talk to the coaches in person, but you can walk around campus. So Notre Dame was really the offer he wanted. So it was on a Sunday. It was August 16th. He posted he decommitted from Nebraska. A couple hours later, posted he committed to Notre Dame. He never even announced an offer. How it's been a while since I've seen someone, if ever, commit to a school without saying, hey, I have an offer from them. So how that came together was interesting. This is Will Schweitzer, 6'4", 215 pounds. I mean, you call him an athlete. You play some linebacker, tight end, rushes off the edge for Notre Dame. He will play Viper. That's his expected position. So with all that context out of the way, Mike, what's your take on this commitment?
Another one of these kids that can play multiple spots, and we've touched on this on the pod before. I think we tend to look at players and slot them into positions. He's a tight end. He's a defensive tackle. He's a safety. He's a corner. And it really seems like Kelly's going after these kids that have multiple skill sets is really probably the best way to define it. And he's another one of them. Probably quicker than he is fast at this point. He's got great hips. He's like, kind of like one of these fluid type kids. Almost reminds me a little bit of Jack Lamb. Can get around the edge as a defensive end. He's got soft hands as a tight end. A good get. I think he'll grow into his body and I think become even more explosive as he puts on some good weight. But it is just interesting, our approach to recruiting in terms of, again, bringing in these kids that can do a lot of different things. And I was thinking about it. It's kind of a testament to Kelly's staff, really. You could take a kid that doesn't have years of experience at one set position, kind of does a lot of different things at the high school level, and you're going to bring him in presumably somewhat raw and mold him into the position that Notre Dame wants him to play into the future. So I like him a lot. Again, I touched on this once before, and I think we were talking about Chris Tyree. And as always, I challenge the subscribers, the viewers, listeners to go back and watch some of these kids play. But a lot of these modern day, and I'm looking over here at his highlight tape, but a lot of these modern day football players, the guys that excel, especially in the NFL, like the way that their body and their ankles and their hips move, like Joey Bosa's got the way they kind of can sort of unlock their hips to get around a tackle. Like Saquon Barkley is a great example of it. His feet are doing one thing, his hips are doing another, and his shoulders are doing another. and they're almost like very Gumby or bendy. Is like I need to come up with a better word, Mike. But this
Like
kid's
bendy.
got a little. Yeah, he's bendy. He's got a little bit of that. He's got a couple kind of. He's a 3-star kid. Jason Anye is another 3-star kid. Schweitzer's much more polished than Anye. Anye is just one of those kind of get off the bus first type guys at this point. I think there's a tremendous amount of upside. But he's just raw, just kind of bullying people when he's playing out there in New Hampshire, whereas Schweitzer has kind of flashed 3 or 4 different pass rush moves on his highlight tape. So you can tell he's been working at it. So I live in Nebraska. I'm sure Husker fans are disappointed, but he's another good get for the Irish.
So I think it's like 11 of the past 13 commitments for Notre Dame and 18 commitments, right? Notre Dame is 18 commitments. So 11 of the past 13 are ranked as 3 stars. And if you're have this all the time on our message board, Rockies Roundtable. It's like Notre Dame gets a 3-star, and then we have a member of our board that they think they've got it figured out. Hey, guys, we're taking too many 3-stars. The recruiting's not working out for us. It's like, all right, welcome to the message board. You think you've got to figure it out? But when you look at each of these different kids, Schweitzer 3-star, you love him. Prince Colley, currently second. He's tied for second lowest ranked prospect of the class, which is making me scratch my head. Prince Colley is not a 3-star. Mitchell Evans is a 3-star. We like Mitchell Evans a lot. Logan Diggs, we like a lot. Chance Tucker, all these 3-stars. Joe Alt might be my personally favorite prospect of the class. Ryan Barnes doesn't have the offer list of a 3-star prospect. Clemson, Florida, all those schools. Jason Anye, you just touched on, has huge upside. Pat Coogan is a 3-star. He picked Notre Dame over Ohio State, Oklahoma, LSU, Texas A&M, Michigan, all these schools. That's an offensive lineman. You have all these 3-stars, so they aren't coming in the most highly touted according to rivals. But, what's your take on all these, quote-unquote 3-star takes for Notre Dame? 'Cause it's not like the coaching staff is sitting around being like, well, this kid's a 3-star, so we're not going to take him. But let's go after the 4-star. Like, they do their own evaluations.
Mm-hmm. I've used this phrase before. It's potential versus production. And I think some of your 4, some of your 5-starred kids, I do think they – and this isn't I'm sure there's outliers here, but
right.
They've got a defined position. They're probably a little bit more physically developed, like they've grown into their body. That probably factors into a higher star rating. And they make a ton of plays probably because of the previous 2 things that I just mentioned. So with a 3-star guy, it's not as obvious, if that makes any sense. So like you look at Schweitzer and you just look at like the way he moves, kind of the biomechanics, and you're like, yeah, I could do something with that. Now he's only 6'4", 215, maybe a 4-star weak side defensive end is 6'4", 245 at this point. So that's why he might get a bump, and he's been playing that position his entire life, and he's a little bit more polished. So I just think that it seems with some of those 3-star guys that we're looking at the upside to me,
right,
as opposed to like, this is where he is today. Like you use the kid, I mentioned him the other day, the big defensive end that's going to Clemson, Brian Breesy.
Yep.
How is he going to get any better? It's obvious, right? You put the tape on, it's like, good gosh, like it's obvious, but he might have kind of peaked,
Sure.
I'm sure his body's going to change a little bit, lose some baby fat as he continues to develop, but like he's a monster. But some of our kids, there's more upside. And if you do watch the tape, you see what the Notre Dame coaches see. So that's my thoughts on it. And then the other thing too, Mike, is we all love height, weight, speed. We love all the hard data, but there's something to be said, and I've seen it. There's something to be said for a 3-star kid that comes in, didn't get all the accolades and the adulation and the hype, and maybe their chip on their shoulder becomes a little bit bigger. So that's a motivating factor for them to continue to develop. sometimes ego can get the best of a 17, 18, 19-year-old high school kid. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So these kids know that. Yeah. So
I've got so many thoughts here. I got to write them down. Okay. Because that was some good stuff. Because I know I will forget because as you're saying, I'm like,
yeah.
ooh, yeah. Okay, so my first thought here, we'll have to wait because we've got to read a quick ad. We got to pay some bills here. Looking for that unique Notre Dame item for the Irish fan in your life? Visit Augie's Locker Room, the country's #1 Notre Dame memorabilia shop. They have the largest selection of Notre Dame helmets dating all the way back to the turn of the century up to present day, including the Shamrock Series helmet. They also have stadium benches, framed tickets, one-of-a-kind Rockney items, signed items, and many other unique pieces. If it's Notre Dame, they have what you're looking for. Visit them online at augieslockerroom.com or call 574-277-NDND. Again, augieslockerroom.com. Okay, so Mike, when you're talking about the upside thing, I've been talking more about floor ceilings in the past few months than I ever have in my life, like with these kids. I think we're in complete agreement on this. With those 4 and 5 star guys, their ceilings their floors are probably, so, talking about ceiling, how good they can be, floor, how bad they can be. I feel like with some of those 4 and 5 star kids, their floors are higher than your 3-star kind of projection. Yeah, Schweitzer, we see his tape. We think we can put 30, 40 pounds on him and make him this, right? Like we see this corner. We think we can make him a safety, or we see, whatever and this is how we want to mold him. Would you say, I mean, it's like with not all 3 stars have the same ceiling, but it does seem like when we go through the commitment list, and you look at these 3 stars, Schweitzer, Calif, Evans, Diggs, Tucker, all these guys, it's like they have a really high ceiling. I mean, you can put up, Joe Alt's ceiling with, in my opinion, any 4 or 5 star offensive tackle in this class, but it's the floor, that bust potential that might be a little bit lower than some of the other highly ranked guys. What do you think about that?
Well, if you're talking about a bust potential, could a 3-star be a bust?
Well, right? I mean, just he doesn't produce. Like he maybe the worst he can be is just a special teams guy or something like that.
Sure. I don't know. I mean, I could tell you. Yeah, I would have to say it off the record, but I could look at the class and be like, okay, I think this one might have more bust potential versus that one.
Yeah.
Because I guess what we're saying is, let's try and use an analogy, Mike.
Okay, I like analogies.
So if we're in a house and it's got cathedral ceilings, right? And maybe the highest ceiling for any high school recruit is like a 12-foot ceiling, let's just say, right? So some of your 3 stars might have to go 7 feet up to get to that 12-foot max.
Sure.
And then some of your 4 stars or 5 stars have only got to go 2 or 3 feet to get to the max. So I think that's ultimately what we're talking about.
And you've got more of a possibility to fall if you got 7 feet rather than 2 feet.
There you go. So
go.
It kind of helps you visualize it. But you see it. I hate to always reference the NFL, but you see it in the NFL. Like, I'll never forget, like Dontari Poe, who was a first-round draft pick by the Chiefs, I believe, out of Memphis as a nose tackle, because he ran like a 4.78 at the combine off the top of my head, and you're like, damn, that's incredible. He's like 305 pounds or whatever he was. How many sacks did he have at Memphis? He had 2. So that's potential versus production. So like I played with a guy, Ryan Roberts, who had 9.5 sacks his senior year at Notre Dame, and never even got a sniff by the NFL. So he had more production, but Dontari Poe's got the potential. Does that make sense?
Sure. I mean, look at Tim Tebow versus Josh Allen. Who's the better NFL quarterback?
Yeah. So you look at
production in college.
You look at, like I said, I think what Kelly's looking for is length, multiplicity in terms of the ability. I can drop him. He can rush. He can cover. And And there's a lot of things to do with it. It's almost like a Bill Belichick approach. Bill Belichick, you look at because this recruiting process is very much akin to the NFL draft. Yes.
Sure.
So, Belichick will take guys, and he's not a great early first round draft guy. He's not a good wide receiver drafter, but he takes guys on defense that can do a lot of different things, and you can use them in a lot of different ways. And with Clark Lee, again, he doesn't always have to have his hand down. I can walk him out in coverage, and that just helps your scheme overall. Versus like, here goes a tangent, but like you watch an SEC defense and talk to anybody that's like coach football or knows football, the schemes are super simple, and they just let their guys go around and just it's man on man. Our guys are better than yours, and they just beat you up. Imagine if you had more flexibility in that schemes and you had the type of kids that Notre Dame is looking for in terms of like their football IQ and their IQ at large. It's exciting because you could do a lot of different things, and you can mask coverages and disguise things. And I'm referencing this is all going back towards Schweitzer. So I never got caught up in the 3-star, 4-star, 5-star. I would have probably been a 5-star or whatever.
You were.
And I can promise you there was kids in Florida. There was some random kid that was a 3-star kid that ended up as a second-round draft pick or a first-round draft pick. Like Courtney Watson was a Butkus Award finalist that was a 3-star running back and then grew into a second-round draft pick of the NFL. Why? Because he could freaking run.
Yeah.
He ran a 4.53. So I understand fans get frustrated with it, but you've got to take into account the academic standards, the personality profile that Notre Dame's going after. And I'm excited to see that outside of your top-rated guys that have those defined positions, outside of those 4, 5, 6 guys that are your 4-star defined positions, it's really fun, frankly, and exciting to see and kind of track these kids as they develop and what position they grow into within our framework.
I feel like for Notre Dame fans, well, I feel like I know, is this class. I mean, we can say, yeah, we like this 3-star, whatever. At the end of the day, is this class getting us closer? Is this helping us close the gap against Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, or is it?
Well,
not? That's what it boils down to.
Hey, great question, Mike. Ready? And I'm not going to single anybody out, or forgive me if I omit someone from this. But Fisher's a baller, Buckner's a baller, Barong's a baller. Riley might be one of my favorite kids in the class. Like, he's a baller. He's going to be a very, really good player. Alt's exciting. Colley's a baller. Spindler's a baller. So those are, to me, Colley's not a highly ranked guy, but he's a baller.
You mentioned Barnes?
I didn't mention Barnes, but yeah, I overlooked him. I probably see him
Spindler
as
baller.
Well, yeah, in Spindler's obviously a baller. So not every kid. It's life. Like, not everybody's going to be a first-round draft pick. It's just not. This is not the way the world works. But if you can take a class of 20-some kids, 18, 21 kids, whatever it is, the final number ends up being, and you can get 4 or 5 ballers and watch the tape. So, yeah, Colley's going to be a baller.
Yeah,
like, he just is. So, yeah, I do think the kids take the stars off, just watch the film, like, damn, that's a really, really good kid, and I can see. You know what I'm saying, Mike?
Yeah, it just comes down to, well, hey, if Notre Dame could get 4 or 5 ballers, great, but is Clemson having 10? Does Alabama have 15? Because their classes are just crazy, and people, I tell them, like, I'm a glass half full, I like Brian Kelly guy, but if you ask me, Mike, is this class national championship level? I don't think it is. If you stack up on paper, at least, on paper, like, I can't project what Schweitzer is going to be, what all these guys are going to be. If you want to look on paper, it's just not, I talk about data points. You look at rankings, offers, you look at these kids' film, what kind of character do they have? Like, obviously, I don't know a lot of the Ohio State and Alabama and what kind of kids all these how they are, but if you try to stack it up as much as you can, like, I don't I mean, Alabama's class. I mean, their offensive line unit, and I love Notre Dame's offensive line class, but it's just like nuts. Like they're off.
Well, then, so here's another data point.
Sure.
GPAs and test scores. So can we factor that into the right? So how many of those kids, these Clemson, these Ohio States, these Alabama, how many of those kids, I mean, somebody should do the research, take all those commitments, how many of those kids would be a fit for Notre Dame academically? And then get back to me.
I mean, there's that. I mean,
how many of those kids, that's what I say, like as a football alum, it's just like that's where all of our kids, yeah, it's like you can't have both. So you want to have 100% graduation rate, a team-wide GPA of 3.0 plus. It's like the kids that we're signing, and the reason that all these fans and the message boards hopefully root for Notre Dame is kind of what they stand for in terms of that standard, and that academic piece is a huge component of that. So if you want to eliminate that, well then yeah, our class would probably reflect Ohio State's, Clemson's, Bama's in terms of star ratings, but it's just that's not the world that we're living in.
Mike, I received a text I want to read here from a source on the Irish side of things a few months back. Our Andrew Mentok is a staff writer at Blue and Gold, and he wrote an article about Notre Dame recruiting 5-star prospects. And at the time, I believe it was in the I want to say it was in the 2020 class or it was 2021. I can't remember. But the article said Notre Dame had offered 17. And the source texted me and said, hey, Mike, so I read this article, saw the number said 17. I would bet that number is actually even smaller. Some of those offers go out so early in the sophomore year that academically they don't even have a chance. So we never even really get to start to recruit those guys.
And we've talked about this before. Have we not?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So that's a frustration I think that you and I share, and probably a lot of people do, is like, you can't, but we do, but we shouldn't. You're canceling kids off of a list based off of a freshman, sophomore, whatever it is, a year and a half of high school.
Dingling the carrot.
Then I like the idea of, hey man, if you could just get it, this is what we're about over here. We're trying to develop you all and make you a professional, and you're going to go out into the world and succeed if football doesn't work out. Because again, take Bama's class, take Clemson's class. How many of those kids are going to play in the NFL? Just not all of them. It just doesn't work. You're not going to have 18 kids drafted from every school every year, and that bears itself out every single year. So yeah, you go to a 15-year-old kid who's halfway through a sophomore season, man, we love you. We'd love to have you. And this is what we're about. And if you want to be about that with us and bump that GPA up and turn that C- into a B.
Well, I think they do that, though. I think they do that. And a lot of times it just doesn't – they just don't.
Not in my experience they haven't. In terms of a couple of the kids here that I –
Yeah.
And that's the crazy thing is you look at a kid – and I'd say on a 4.0 scale, he's got a 2.7 or something like that. And they'll cross him off a list. And maybe they're looking for a 3.1, but that's doable. It's not like the kid's got a 1.8.
Yeah.
And it's just too far of a jump. But there's a lot that kids can do. So. Yeah. But yeah, I think you just stay in the picture. And then again, identify some of these kids but yeah, I'm restraining myself here.
Well, we'll go to a sponsor, and then we got more to talk about. Yesterday's Restaurant in Granger is a full-service restaurant serving some of the best food you will ever taste. At Yesterday's Restaurant, the philosophy is simple. Life is short, eat well. They believe that every meal should be a special occasion. That's why at Yesterday's, they serve only the finest organic and locally grown produced vegetables, fruits, dairies, meats, and fish. They hand make most of the delicious meals from scratch using only the finest ingredients available. Everything they serve is fresh and guaranteed delicious, and the recipes are unique and original. From prime rib, fresh fish, to the award-winning Great Scott Burger, rated by ZZ Zippy as the #1 hamburger in a 100-mile radius, you are sure to delight your taste buds. Yesterday's makes their desserts from scratch, fresh every day, including the world-famous Corbett cheesecake. Let the staff who love what they do make your Yesterday's Restaurant experience outstanding. Visit online at yesterdays.granger.com or book your reservation on OpenTable or call 574-272-7017. All right, well, I am hungry now. So Mike, are you still with us, Mike?
Oh, yeah, I'm with you.
So Schweitzer committed to Nebraska. You're in Husker territory. Did you have any run-ins with any Nebraska fans? Did you get to talk to Schweitzer about any of your buddies in town?
No. But there's a sentiment in town that, I'm anti-Husker, that I try and sway some of the kids that I am fortunate enough to work with away from the Huskers, which isn't at all true. But no, I haven't heard anything. I haven't. So I think most Husker fans right now, their focus is on
nothing,
not having a season and the frustrations that come with that. So,
or apparently they're maybe going to have some. I don't know. Apparently, some Big Ten schools have talked about just playing each other and some.
Well, yeah, and I wanted to talk about this today too. So,
sure.
And this factors are kind of rolls into recruiting, but SEC is going to be playing, if you're a big shot wide receiver that's looking, your top three is LSU, Ohio State, and USC, let's say. 2 out of the 3 of those teams you're not going to be watching them play on television. And how does that what does that look like for the teams that don't play versus the teams that are playing? And I don't know how much it's going to weigh in or factor in, but maybe does this Schweitzer decommitting from Nebraska, did 10% of that, the fact that Nebraska looks like they may not play this year, does that factor into his decision to switch? And then other kids, or maybe some other kids that are still looking at Notre Dame and they're looking at Wisconsin, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State. Now they're like, well, shoot, Notre Dame's on TV. That might kind of draw them in a little bit closer. It can't hurt.
I was about to say it can only help. Like if you have a good season, it's almost like if Notre Dame's undefeated or if Notre Dame's one loss and, they're the number 5 team in the rankings. And then the number 6 team, let's say it's like Baylor. They also have 1 loss. Well, they get to play in the conference championship game. So when they win that conference championship game, they're probably going to jump Notre Dame because they have that last game. I feel like it could be the same with recruiting. It's like we have these 2 even schools, right? I'm looking at LSU. I'm looking at USC. Well, USC's not playing, and LSU is 8-0 right now. So they kind of have that last little push there, if that makes sense.
It does.
With Schweitzer specifically, I don't think it had anything to do with Nebraska and had everything to do with Notre Dame. In that case specifically, like Notre Dame was the school he wanted, like just straight up. But in other cases, yeah, I think it is a. I don't know if we said this yet. It's kind of like a "What have you done for me lately?" Kind of thing where I've seen that school on TV. I've seen Brian Kelly on the sideline, and who's USC's coach again? Like it might be something like that. So, but
something that's notable about him too that you touched on. He took a vacation or something in Indiana, which maybe that's the first time that's ever been said, but. So he took a trip to Indiana on vacation with some buddies to a lake house and happened to see the campus.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and everybody knows. I mean, it's a beautiful campus. I mean, I think a lot of people's fandom, part of that's attached to the experience of going to campus for a game day or something like that. So I wonder how many kids, due to this COVID situation, we lost out on just because you couldn't get them to campus, because it does shine when compared to most.
Absolutely, Mike. So Notre Dame had a huge recruiting weekend, March 20th planned, and that didn't happen. I mean, the day, crap hit the fan was like March 11th or 12th, and 9 days, Notre Dame's supposed to have a huge recruiting weekend. So the fans' reaction is, well, everyone's dealing with the pandemic, It's not just a Notre Dame problem, but
it is a Notre Dame problem because it's you got to take the regional thing into account.
When Will Shipley hadn't been on campus in 5 months, Nolan Rucci hadn't been on campus in a year, Landon Tangwell hadn't, like all these kids hadn't been on campus in so long because they were booking on, no pun intended, that weekend, and then an official visit in April, May, or June. Like, they were all planning to do 2 visits to Notre Dame. One in March, which apparently Quentin Nelson and Ronnie Stanley, like all these guys were going to be, like, former Notre Dame offensive linemen, were going to be on campus that weekend as well. So, yeah, that could have really changed the tide. Like, I was talking to a source this week, Landon Tengwall is a top 50 player in the country. He's now committed to Penn State. Source felt like, hey, if we would have got Landon Tengwall back on campus, like, Notre Dame probably would have gotten him. And after he visited in spring of 2019, Notre Dame was his leader, and everyone thought he was a Notre Dame lean. And then he didn't get back on campus and never visited. So Penn State got him. So it's Notre Dame is a place, and all my sources tell me this. Notre Dame is a place in recruiting, and Mike, you can speak to this, that you need to see it and touch it and smell it and feel it, like all this stuff, where it's like when you go there, it's just different than other schools.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah, I can remember going to a couple different Big Ten schools. I had 30-something scholarship offers and visited 3 schools in person.
Which were?
Notre Dame, like multiple times. Michigan State once, and Michigan. That was it. I never even looked at other schools, which, it speaks to how freaking clueless we were in the recruiting process and how well Coach Madison did to kind of keep us under wraps when he was recruiting me. But yeah, it does stand out. It depends on what kids are looking for. Some kids do want to live in a more metro city type environment. Some kids want a more rural environment.
Some kids want a football dorm, like some kids do. Like, I've had parents say, I love that about Notre Dame, and some kids say, I don't like that about Notre Dame. So just different strokes for different folks.
Yeah. And in terms of, I'll be 38 next year, in terms of my friendships that I built at Notre Dame. I talk to my non-football friends as much, if probably not more, than I do my football friends or ex-teammates. So yeah, but that's part of what we're going back to earlier when you were talking about Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State's. We just do things a little bit differently in terms of the recruiting classes. Those kids are going to want a training table. They're going to want to be spoon-fed everything, and babied. We're babied at Notre Dame. You're babied as an athlete in general. But that's why when some of these guys come out of football and it doesn't work out, it's a shock to the system. It really is. So
I just want to interject. Maybe people forget that this is more than just football. Like, fans subscribe to our site, blueandgold.com, to talk about recruiting and to talk about games, and it's all about national championship, right? But Notre Dame specifically, that's not the end all be all. And some fans are going to be pissed to hear that, but it's the truth. Like, life is bigger than college football.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's these kids, they've got to live a life beyond college football.
Right.
And that's where Notre Dame, it's freaking hard. But everybody's, if you're up for a challenge, but yeah, you're going from 7 a.m. to 10. If they have better grades, hopefully they have better grades than I did, because I had to go to study hall for 3 years, but you're going from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. You're going every single day. So
final question for you, Mike. So
yeah,
everyone talks about 4 for 40, right? You go to Notre Dame for 4 years, and then it pays off for you for 40 years. And your experience, would you say having that Notre Dame degree has seriously helped you in different situations post football?
It's
because in my career, sorry to interject, I have a USF degree. I have never had anyone ask me about my USF degree. It's just kind of been a part of a resume kind of deal. Everything I've gotten to this point has absolutely nothing to do with my education. Notre Dame, how's that different?
So I would say it's a layered answer, Mike. It's a great question. And I don't think I've ever been asked that, just matter-of-factly. I think it depends on where you live post-football. So, are you in the city of Chicago where there's probably 50,000 Notre Dame alums, or are you in
Sure.
Did you take a job in Cleveland? But there's Notre Dame clubs everywhere. I know that living in Omaha, Nebraska's number one Creighton basketball is probably number 2. And then because there's a lot of Catholics here, like Notre
Sure.
Dame, there's a lot of Notre Dame fans here. So I think that factors in. I think the field that you go into or your field of study while you're in school matters. Like guys will go into there's a couple guys that I played with that went into finance and they crush.
Yeah.
Like they're crushing life right now. So that matters. And then the third thing, and this is something I try and tell kids that I train and mentor now, it's like anything else, Mike. If you work it, it'll work for you. So there's so many opportunities for you to network, and football can open so many doors for yourself. But you got to meet those doors or meet those opportunities halfway. So like you got to stick your neck out there, and people will help you, and people can help you connect some dots and go to lunch and introduce you. But you got to put yourself in that kind of uncomfortable situation. Admittedly, I didn't learn to do that until I was probably 30, and I probably had I probably had a couple years where I was still several years, you're still trying to kind of redefine yourself as a human being when football is kind of gone. But yeah, it'll definitely work for you. And you do learn some of those things and some of those skills, because networking and those things is a skill, but you have to put yourself out there when football's done or when you walk away from, or, graduate,
Do you like that question? It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. So yeah, I would say that it didn't necessarily for me immediately, but I would say I'm really big on self-accountability. I would say that that's 100% my fault.
Okay.
Because I didn't have the confidence to sort of play that sort of game. And frankly, didn't have the confidence in myself at that point because I hadn't kind of just continued my professional development. So yeah, but then we also talk about, Mike, the last thing though, the Notre Dame fandom, like I want ballers. I want kids that are all ball. I want kids that are all in. But then we also want them to be good students and be productive and contribute post-college. But I don't want kids that are focused on that finance career
right
when they're 2/3 of the way through their 3/4 of the way through their Notre Dame football career. So that's kind of a balance. Like they know they've got a sweet job lined up. They took a killer internship or whatever is the case. So they know somebody. So they've got a really soft landing spot if football doesn't work out. So that's it. Again, there is a balance there.
Right.
So that's me talking out of both sides of my mouth.
No, it's a balance. No, for sure.
But there's a great expression. You probably heard it before, having been around Notre Dame long enough. I heard this once at like a Notre Dame get together, and it's like it goes something to the effect of, Mike, how do you know if somebody went to Notre Dame?
How's that?
They'll tell you.
Do you tell people?
Well, it just depends. Like, I'm in sales for a living, and you try and differentiate yourself, whether it's through your products or whether it's through your approach or customer service, you name it. But a lot of people like to talk sports, and sometimes I'll try and weave it in once if I become competent at what I'm there to do. Yeah. And oh, by the way, this is something else. Oh, no kidding. I think sometimes if you weave in the Notre Dame football thing on the back end of things, people are almost more impressed that you didn't lead with it. Yeah.
So I lived down in Atlanta, and I had a church kind of get together with a small group, and we had a new pastor at our church. So introduced myself to the pastor, shakes my hand. Okay, great. Well, 30 minutes later, he comes up to me and he's like, "Oh, I didn't know you were a sports writer. You covered Notre Dame? Were you at the Georgia game last year?" And now he's talking to me about Georgia football recruiting. It's like, oh, not now. And now I'm, interesting to you. So
yeah, well, yeah,
interesting.
People love to bond over things. And that's at least everybody watching football. That's one thing, a commonality. And then if it's more, you can drill down to that we're both Notre Dame fans, or they hate Notre Dame.
Yeah.
That's another cool thing too about Notre Dame is like the history of the program, where that fandom seems to get passed down almost through generations, where granddad was a huge Notre Dame fan, dad is, son is.
Absolutely.
or they know somebody that was everybody knows somebody that's a huge Notre Dame fan, which is it's
or
cool
hates,
because
or probably hates.
But yeah, man, I mean, like you could go to freaking Wichita, Kansas, and walk through the mall and see somebody wearing a Notre Dame sweatshirt. Like it's
huge.
So yeah, there's that is very real. It's very real, and I go back to winning isn't everything. What does Notre Dame stand for? The single most, probably what makes me most proud about being a football alum is that I know that when kids leave the program, they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Like they have a degree. Some kids are going to make tons of money. Some guys aren't going to make as much money, but like everybody's going to be okay. Versus I know that there's guys that'll go to some of these top flight programs. They don't graduate, or they graduate with a worthless degree because they just get pushed through the college. And then they're just off into the ether of, maybe I don't know what they end up doing with their lives because they're not at all prepared. So I've gotten into some conversations at bars because I like to talk a little smack and whatever. It's like, well, so you're a diehard, oh, you got an Ohio State tattoo? Sweet, man. Like, what are you about? So like, do you realize that this is actually what's going on, is that 40% of your kids aren't going to graduate, and then they're just going to be potentially lost. The propensity or the likelihood that those kids are going to be lost beyond football is much, much higher than a kid that goes to Notre Dame. So it's like, I'm damn proud of the fact that we can win the amount of games that we win, graduate all of our kids, and then they go out and they can make their own way, it's awesome. It really is. So I think that's probably a good thing to wrap up. My phone's about to die anyways, buddy.
I was going to say, how about that for a recruiting show? Now we're inadvertently recruiting for Notre Dame here. So that's this episode of Pod Like a Champion. Please, if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell so you can get notifications every time we post a video. And if you want to support our podcast, leave us a voice message or listen to any other of our podcasts. Go to anchor.fm/blue and gold, or just find us wherever the heck you listen to our podcast. Thank you so much for listening or watching this episode of Pod Like Champion.